This is San Francisco.
Welcome to San Francisco, where police were temporarily uninvited from gay pride and where 2 years later they were invited back. I am Toshio Meronek. I am a writer and sometimes a journalist. I have a book coming out with Miss Major Griffin-Gracy. It's called Miss Major Speaks. You can pre-order it now from just about anywhere online, or your local library is probably a better place to get it. I also have here today with me another guest that I hope will, I'm kind of like nudging her into this like co-hostual space. We'll see if I am making any headway by the end of the episode. But I have Jemma DeCristo here.
I'm back. Hi. Thank you for having me. I've never been proposed to for to be in your host polycule. Neither of us have blue hair or utilicals, but
I'm wearing an orange headband.
You are wearing a headband. You're a member of the headband community. Mm-hmm. I was in 2019 before I made my break with that community. My partner,
I'm still buying
Kelsey,
headbands.
Will attest to that. It took a lot of deprogramming and a van that pulled up to get me out of that community.
Okay,
but I'm here and I'm alive today to talk about our topic. I'll let you introduce it. But hello, this is Jemma, and I'm glad to be here, and we'll probably be here again in some way, shape, or form.
God, I hope so. Yeah, well, it sounds like I have a lot to look forward to as far as headbands go. But today we are talking about the lengths police will go to in order to get their overtime, and also the propaganda departments funded by the city. Cops have marched in the gay pride parade for years, which has translated into anti-cop protests for years. The original gay pride, as most people listening will know, was an anti-police riot at Stonewall. Today, every June, San Francisco hosts the largest gay pride in the US, sometimes the world, depending on numbers. In 2019, gay pride swelled to over 1 million people. It's a huge tourist event here in the city. Brings in over $1 billion to businesses and nonprofits, and also the city via taxes every year. It also has a parade component, of course, and that goes down our main drag, Market Street, every year on the final day, Sunday of SF Pride. And the parade is kind of a lowest common denominator affair where I would say politics are discouraged, even though politicians are celebrated and usually roll down Market Street in the convertibles, usually sponsored by a local used car dealership, using the parade as an opportunity to campaign for votes of liberals.
Advertising, right? It's all advertising.
Yeah.
Advertising, political and market, the state and the market.
Correct. So before 2019, the last time I really remember the parade being any kind of political, apart from being political in the way that everything is political, and therefore the parade kind of was just a pro-corporate, libertarian capitalist parade with all the floats basically representing different companies. So that's its own kind of political statement. But I remember it being like quasi-progressive-ish when Chelsea Manning was voted community grand marshal. At the time, she was still in federal prison, and the SF Pride Board made the decision to revoke her award because she had been disrespectful to the military. And
we never want to be disrespectful to the military. They do a lovely job of polluting our earth as the number one polluter. We don't want to disparage them at all.
No. Yeah, no, you should do what you're going to do. I mean, it seems like military contractors are the bigger villain these days. But
and there are gay military contractors. Let's wake that up.
That's true.
Right?
And
there are lots of,
San Francisco is a place where those people can feel represented just like the cops that we're about to speak about. In 2019, as a little prologue, queer and trans protesters blockaded the street of Market Street's 120-foot wide human blockade of rainbow-chained queer and trans protesters. And in 2019, they were there with an anti-corporate, anti-cop message, radical direct action groups, members of Gay Shame, the group Abolish ICE at the time, called attention to the growing human stain of death and suffering along the US-Mexico border, the refugee and detention crisis that is caused by our government in large part. So at this protest, this blockade of the march, police officers swarmed and, like a strep throat swab under a microscope, they surrounded the protesters in their typical numbers, which is, 10 cops to a protester, it seems like.
Speaking of polycules.
Yeah, they do like to congregate.
When you really think about it, what is a police force but one big polycule? We need to be more open about those labels, right? Yeah.
Big blue polycule.
Big blue polycule. Blue hair. Exactly. The blue again.
A few floats back were Pride's marquee corporate sponsors, Google, Facebook, Salesforce, and the like, stuck in the queue of the floats with thousands of partiers on either side of the parade route. Corporations can't wait, so the cops must arrest. Cops arrested the protesters spanning the 120 feet of Market Street using kind of the robot bully energy that they have. They broke one of the protesters' mobility devices, a cane for walking, as well as glasses. Protester came out of the situation with a concussion and a fractured wrist, plus a displaced hip due to the force of 4 officers who were later named in a lawsuit over the incident, including Lieutenant John Burke, who had a, quote, documented history of targeting peaceful protesters violently. And I'm sure that Lieutenant Burke will make an appearance.
Right. And that was, I'm sure he'll argue that was just a preference, right? And we don't want to, we know in our community, we don't want
within the polycule,
stigmatize police's preferences for who they systematically like to abuse. Right?
Absolutely.
More pride, there.
Yeah, no, inclusion and tolerance. A couple weeks after Pride, the nonprofit that runs SF Pride holds a meeting to start planning the next year's Pride. Gay Shame and Abolish ICE showed up there as well. The person beaten by the police, whose arm had been put in a cast, was also there. They swarmed the very administrative, bureaucratic board meeting, demanding that Pride take a stand on behalf of most queer and trans people who, like most human beings, recognize that cops are paid to protect, rich people and not the rest of us. What happened in the end was SF Pride put out a weak statement against police brutality. And the next June, in 2020, there was a short window when even events like SF Pride, this stodgy, pro-corporate, pro-cop organization, SF Pride had a hard time ignoring the anti-cop rebellions happening around the world. On the other hand, it was the first time Pride was held online due to COVID, and it was held in a very depressing Zoom room filled with a lot of
Pride,
pre-recorded messages from C to D list celebrities.
If only that was it every year. If only every year it was relegated to a Zoom room.
Well, it was for 2 years. It also presented some low-hanging fruit to SF Pride because they subtracted cops from the quote-unquote celebration online. So, there was no police skit created by the public relations department that ran during this Zoom Pride that year in 2020. But by 2022, politicians had kind of gone from their 2020 pro-BLM tweets to tweeting about how police don't get paid enough. And by the way, we're going to need to increase the gun budget for cops this year because the police state is back, ladies. Pride was back in person in 2022. And initially, the police were still uninvited from marching in the parade, at least in uniform. And with that detail, I'll give some clarity there. In 2020, SF Pride had just disinvited cops from participating in uniform. It wasn't like a blanket, we don't want cops here, they're not welcome. Cops were still being paid to, quote unquote, guard the proceedings. And once Pride came back live and in person, the SF Pride Board never agreed to anything more than cops cannot show up to the Pride parade in uniform.
Just tone it down a little bit. They didn't want them to be as flamboyant.
Just go undercover, like a lot of them
go back in the closet, and they didn't want to go back in the closet, did they?
Correct. Yeah, they couldn't be pushed back in.
Yeah.
They would still make a lot of money patrolling and arresting Black and brown people for, drinking too much hard seltzer or whatever around the Pride proceedings. They would also get paid, the police snipers would get paid to post up on top of buildings along the route of the Dyke March or the main parade on Sunday, and many more of the overtime opportunities they've come to expect thanks to SF Pride, which is millions of dollars in overtime, because in SF, in addition to their salaries, cops take home, in some cases, $300,000 plus a year just in overtime. Police are the most well-paid government employees generally in SF. In addition, they get free coffee from Phil's. There's a drink named
lots of places. Muddy's, Martha Brothers, I think, unfortunately, which I used to frequent because I like the coffee, but I don't anymore.
Yeah. It's hard to get past that, especially when they're like double parked outside.
Yeah, in front of them, blocking a wheelchair accessible spot, or
usually,
like that. Yeah, usually. Or a ramp. Yeah.
Their housing is subsidized. Cops start with six-figure salaries and also get starting and retention bonuses for a job where they generally sit in air-conditioned cars all day while the rest of the city swelters under global warming. They're there to intimidate, kill poor people at the behest of wealthy San Franciscans. They get pensions of up to 90% of their salary after they retire, which is not too shabby. You might not know that cops only get paid overtime if they're wearing the blue uniform. There's that distinction. So obviously the cop unions push back against the Pride policy, because why would cops, including the gay ones, want to march in a parade for free?
I think Pride isn't Pride if it isn't, if you're not being paid for it. I think the Google floats and the Raytheon floats, I haven't been since I was a youth, so I'm going to just add floats to it. The Blackstone, the Blackwater float. I don't know what the ones they have there.
Yeah, no, I remember the Facebook,
float.
Which is, they were speaking just after Facebook had to let go quite a few people. What was it, 11,000?
11,000. They are all leaving, hopefully, as of the time of this recording.
My mom was an early, what's the opposite of adopter? Well, she left Facebook.
Abandoner?
Before everyone I knew, and, snaps to mom.
Yeah.
But
she seems the trendsetter.
I think she might have started.
Weaves.
She was the stone.
Yeah.
That started.
First, she threw the first brick, is where we're going. Don't bring it back.
Well, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Brick at Facebook. Yeah.
But, they're doing horribly. I do remember, though, Mark Zuckerberg's face plastered all over the local media because he was indeed on one of those fake cable cars that's not actually on any cables with Facebook. Well,
there's something very queer about his appearance. I think we would all agree. Almost monstrous.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
it's
depending on your definition.
Yeah. I mean, what's queerer than possibly an alien? Or a simulation. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We could go for a circle back into the drones. Drones are queer. So we have that. We have the queer drones.
I want to make an aside. There's no actual connection, but I was just reminded of Do you remember when Enrique Iglesias had his finger cut off at a concert by a roving drone with a camera on it?
No.
Okay, well, look it up. There's some footage, and it's pretty grisly. Anyway, he's fine.
Brutal. Yeah, he's fine. He won't be making it to Pride.
The Facebook employees, TBD. I'm sure they'll be quite okay. Except for, unless you work in like service at Facebook, and then you might be screwed because you probably work for a subcontracting company. There have actually been recent protests outside of Facebook in San Francisco because they have headquarters, in south of the city, and then also in San Francisco. There was a big janitor strike outside of Facebook, but they don't work directly for Facebook. So they're not getting any of those Facebook severances. They're working for a third
Nor
party.
any of the kind of sympathy that people for some reason have for techies.
Yeah.
Make, minimum six figures and to design, in most cases, surveillance technology and weapons of war.
It seems a little unbalanced in where the sympathy is headed.
And it brings it back to this, right? Because you see this online a lot where there is like people like, hey, there are queer people in tech. We've encountered this. And really as we see from the floats, those are the only people who tend to count as queer by virtue of their allegiance to multinational corporations and power structures.
Allies and politicians first.
Yes. That's sinking now for them. Yeah.
It does seem to be. I mean, there's a little bit of hope, maybe, just in that fact. But the role, as we know, of the police is to guard the interests of the powerful, of the Zuckerbergs and the London breeds in their convertibles or fake cable cars. So what the police do, there are also people hired to kind of sell out and be alleged LGBTQ ambassadors who are the cleanup crew for the cops. And their job is damage control. For example, we have transgender community liaisons for both the mayor and the police get paid to bridge the divide whenever the mayor or cops do something fucked up that involves queer or trans people, and they give cover to embarrassing situations, such as when someone leaks racist, homophobic, transphobic text between SF police officers using their, department phones, or trans woman going on hunger strike in SF County Jail because she's being abused. These are both things that have happened in recent years. Similarly, the Police Oversight Commission is basically human waste. It's filled mostly with jokesters appointed by consistently pro-cop mayors of San Francisco. I remember the Oversight Commission's big demand in 2020 during the protests was that Black Lives Matter's posters be printed and hung up in every police station, which they were.
Nothing says inclusion like being hung up in a police station.
So let's talk about the personalities in this story. You can see the puppets of the police. There is Mayor London Breed, and she bows to the police.
She's an ally to all.
The police.
She's queering allyship in that way.
The police, the gays, the former more than the latter, because as we'll see, she has puppets in the context of this story as well to cover for her. The SF Police Officers Association, the Police Officers Union, you could say, and the other law enforcement agency public relations departments were clearly feeding Breed information. Again, there are so many layers of cops in the city: the sheriffs, university police, public transportation police for both Muni and BART. The Department of Public Works has security force.
DPW, Department of Public Works, right? A lot of the people who, if you live in San Francisco, are doing the material work or, materializing the force of sweeps and in the state. Right. So the ones who actually are throwing people's tents away, stealing their belongings, their family photos, their identity documents that they need to get housing or jobs or anything.
Yeah, it's usually not the police themselves that are doing that because they don't want to touch.
They don't want to touch her. Yeah. They don't get paid enough to.
No. So it falls on, the Department of Public Works, private police contractors like Urban Alchemy, which will come up in a future episode, So under London Breed, though, puppets will say are these cultural districts. In most cities, you will have these organizations that are just bureaucratic instruments to put a stamp of approval on questionable things the city does. Sometimes they go by the name Community Benefits District. Sometimes they're known as Business Improvement Districts. Sometimes Arts Districts, sometimes Cultural Districts. In San Francisco, we have all of these.
It's a different diversity.
So many bureaucracies, all of these neighborhood watch groups. In San Francisco, as far as cultural districts go, we have the transgender district in the Tenderloin, mostly, and a little bit of Soma, and the LGBTQ.
In the street poles?
Yeah, there's street poles with
right near the condos.
Flag, the transgender flag painted on them.
Made by, to bring it back to our military, made by a white trans woman, shocker, who was super pro-military.
That
trans flag, of course, right? Yeah. So and already, trans inclusive imperialism.
Oh God, Miss Major hates those colors, and it's true. I mean, I love it, it's the colors, so it's pink and white and baby
white for
blue.
The woman who created it, right? Or is what's it for her?
I think it must be. Yeah, I never actually questioned what the white was for, but like the pink and the blue.
We never question what the white was for. We're about to jump into a slam poem. Watch out.
So we're breaking ground here, just like she broke ground when she decided to make that very binary baby blue versus pink back in the day. The colors of a birth reveal party.
A birth, yeah. Or the colors of the clinic, I guess. I don't know if they still do that. That was, I think my birth certificate was, I don't want to bring up assigned gender birth discourse. So,
but it was actually a color.
It was, yeah. They were,
I
think they did blue and like a salmon or a light mauve. Is that, I don't know.
Yeah, not a millennial pink at that point in time.
Yeah,
we're giving away our age, but
yeah, that's true. You're right. They would have had
we're not 12, actually.
We're not 12. That's right. We're not 12. Yeah.
London funds these organizations like the LGBTQ district and the Castro, the trans district in the Tenderloin, the leather district in Soma. Yeah. Allegedly, these organizations are meant to represent each of these communities in their names.
Well, and right there, they're often, one of the challenges, I don't know if you're going to get into this, is that people in those neighborhoods and the nonprofits in those neighborhoods will rally for these too, right? They will. So you do end up fighting, and I'm using air quotes for those who are listening by radio as opposed to our massive television audience. The community, in quotes, is usually the nonprofit that remains in the neighborhood. Right. So, like the Filipino district also is part of the leather district, or that's a whole thing. The few people who maybe can still afford to live in the neighborhood, who have not been displaced, right? Who stand to benefit from these districts.
It's because they are presented. They're a semi-new invention. They're not that new in that they are just another form of these other bureaucracies that named earlier, like the community benefits districts and like these local neighborhood organizations that are part of the official like city structure. Mm-hmm. They claim to represent identities versus space. These new cultural districts, it's identity that they're allegedly representing.
And I don't know this, but maybe you would. My sense when I think about it too is a more direct connection is, you think of somewhere like New York, like where you had like the meatpacking district, the diamond district. My sense was always the businesses carried some authority or cachet in those neighborhoods to kind of determine how things operate, including police and resources. And now we live in a landscape where culture masquerades as, or business masquerades as culture. Maybe that's the way to say it. So now we have things like, you can go back to the Castro, but certainly like, let's say the trans district or something, which, so it's kind of a culturified aesthetic facade or something like that. That is still the old business operations and property operations and police operations that prop up these districts, but they have kind of a warm, cultural facade, right? Because culture is supposed to be wholly a good, you rarely hear someone say, fuck culture, or something.
Yeah, no. And I think
whereas you might hear them
maybe
say fuck businesses or
will start happening because with the arts districts, like people are starting to recognize that this is a bit of a Trojan horse, to use
that's the better
cliche. But it's people know that an arts district is going to bring gentrification and it's going to bring more police to the area and probably like more corporate landlords are going to move in and businesses who are probably not going to be necessarily arts oriented, but serve the people who consider themselves to be appreciators of art.
Art allies, we might call them in our speak.
Yeah, sure. And so with the cultural districts, I think it's also telling that one of the main initiatives that, like I just saw the leather district is doing this now, but like the trans district has done this, is to have these entrepreneurship programs.
Right.
Where, they fund, I guess, training and maybe like some initial like business
seed money.
Permitting,
they would
seed
call
money.
It in the biz of pretending to be a business person. We call that seed money.
So, I mean, it does seem like a scam because it's just you're giving friends in some cases like money to start a business, or people who will give cover to you and your job as you give cover to people like London Breed, to bring it back. And we should talk about these districts more in the future because there's a lot more to say. But
we can bring them back to Pride.
We'll talk about how this Pride was copless for 2 years, and now
cops gone wild. Copless Pride
no longer. The mayor, London Breed, can fund or defund these cultural districts if she wants. The trans district, if it feels like its budget is in danger, they can use a situation like the police being temporarily forced out of Pride as a negotiating point to keep their salaries, which is exactly what happened in this case. The trans district wrote a letter to Pride asking that the police not appear.
And just to clarify for our listeners, the trans district, and this works with a lot of it, is a nonprofit itself. It's not like folks in the neighborhood got together. Really, obvious point, but worth saying, right? That like this is the way nonprofits appropriate the notion of community, right? So like the trans district, we might think, oh, that means all the trans people who live in that neighborhood, or even just all the people, maybe targeted people who live in that neighborhood. But this is actually just the relatively few, I'm going to say less than 10 people who work for the trans district, maybe. And
I think it's
a few of whom make
5
very healthy salaries.
The trans district writes this letter to Pride coming off of the 2020 protests and cops, not appearing on these SF Pride Zoom rooms. And then the LGBTQ and leather districts followed the lead of the trans district and also signed on to a letter asking the police not appear in uniform at the Pride Parade in 2022. And so you have this picture that we can throw up in the show notes of, the trans person who heads the trans district, plus Mayor London Breed, plus...
We're talking about Aria. I'm a name dropper.
Oh, no, might as well. But the public pays their salaries, so...
I don't know if we can Sacramento be those salaries. If anyone knows that, you can, in California, look up public salaries.
I actually did try for the purpose of this episode, like Transparency California or something is the website where you can look up any public official's salary. Because of COVID, there's a lag. It's in the 6 figures for sure. There's this picture that I was describing of the person who's of Aria, who heads the trans district, London Breed, and the trans rep from the police department coming out of a meeting with smiles on their faces, like they'd made a deal, they'd come to an agreement. And London Breed could claim she had community support from the trans district.
The way you said it, though, that's right. What is the correct way? Freudian slip.
What happened after the Pride board asked police not to march in the Sunday Pride march in a uniform, London Breed got on board and said, as much as I love Pride, as much as I'm an ally, I gotta stand with the police. I gotta stand with the gay police and the trans police.
Yeah.
I mean,
preach it.
So she removed herself from Pride, just as the police and the fire department in solidarity were also removing themselves from the Pride parade.
Right. And the representation to lose a mayor married to a Hong Kong billionaire real estate mogul at a queer parade, right? The queerest, kind of queer.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. After the trans district, London Breed and the trans rep from the police department came out of a meeting with smiles on their faces. Now London Breed could claim she had community support from the trans district. So a lot of people I know in the Tenderloin don't even know exists. And
there's street polls.
there are those street polls.
Oh,
yeah,
and that's
the flag,
it.
the colors of the flag.
There's street polls and condos. And we'll let our viewership or our listenership, again, we have a huge viewership, so hard to keep track, but we'll let them guess which was the actual reason they built the trans district. Was it the massive luxury condos they're building there, or was it because they just love trans people and wanted to paint some flags around it?
Well, I don't know, but I do know that those poles cost tens of thousands of dollars to maintain.
Right.
And
those could go to a trans person.
Perhaps.
Right. Perhaps,
I mean, could go to a lot of things. I mean, right. So, we know about these people. I worked for one of the founders of the district. She has mixed feelings about it, but yeah, we can't really name anything concretely that they've done to help trans people besides maybe painting these lampposts, color of the trans flag. They have a gala every year called a Riot Party.
Sponsored by US Bank.
Yeah, the last one was sponsored by US Bank as the marquee sponsor.
Nothing says Riot like bank sponsorship.
Like ATM fees, yeah. Where they honor politicians with ally awards. I guess it's an excuse.
Well, you don't want them to get ally fatigue. We learned how challenging that was in 2020. All the ally fatigue. I mean,
right. Yeah, it comes in waves. They have funneled a few bucks into housing trans people, but last I checked, it was like less than
the zero range. It was
fewer than 30. It was fewer than 30 people.
It was closer to the zero range than the thousands. Yeah, that's
been around for over 5 years, and there are so many empty condos now that were built as a result of having the blessing of the trans district. In any case, so as of Pride, when they signaled police weren't invited to the parade for a third year in a row, and this time it wasn't going to be a Zoom watched by no one, they did play the victims.
Another book title. I'm sorry. A Zoom watched by no one.
They were like, okay, fine, we're out. They fed some propaganda segments to the local news where, they brought out like the trans cop or the lesbian cop or two who...
The sellouts.
Sure. Yeah. I mean...
We don't use the term sellout enough. I'm just going to say that we're also going to age ourselves.
I think they come back. I think it's been out for long enough. Like selling out was the point for so long that maybe...
Oh, yeah. Maybe it'll come back. I mean, fashion cycles are so quick.
It felt like very much like Barry Weiss brand of freedom of expression. Like, let the cops be cops. Like they're a protected class.
Don't closet them. They're the most abused people on the planet. They had, could you even imagine the experience? First, you come out as a cop to your parents. They're tough with you. Then they're supportive, and they're all geared up to go to the parade of the people, whatever the other people are, and, see you at work, yelling at queer people and, or maybe aiming your sniper rifle at them. And then you got to call those same accepting parents and tell them, sorry, mom and dad, apparently my lifestyle isn't welcome in San Francisco.
Well, that is the plot of a lot of coming of age / rom-coms. Something else was going on behind the scenes, though, as less than a month remained until Pride 2022, when London Breed, the mayor, and the cops and the firefighters said, no, hell no, we won't go to the parade because we can't march in uniform and we want that overtime money. So the police have a large, well-funded public relations department run partially by fags, because we fags love staffing marketing departments for some reason. Just a hunch that it was people like Matt Dorsey, these gays at the PR wing of the SFPD, who saw backlash like this coming. They recognized public sentiment was not with them after the 2020 anti-police protests. So they worked the mayor's office behind the scenes. She came out releasing the statement saying she wouldn't be attending Pride. She was joining the police in boycotting Pride. And that would be the case until the police were allowed back in uniform. Breed's words exactly were, quote, "I've made this very hard decision in order to support those members of the LGBTQ community who serve in uniform in our police department and sheriff's department, who have been told they cannot march in uniform," end quote. With Breed especially, I mean, she doesn't have like a claim that she has any remarkable connection to gay people at Chicago Pride.
I mean, in that allyship, that ally card.
Well, that's true. And
we're forgetting the A.
Yes, LGBTQ, it starts with an A. And SF Pride, I mean, it's different from like Chicago Pride. They have another neoliberal mayor named Lori Lightfoot, who happens to be a lesbian. Yeah, she's lucky for her. So like just like those suits happen on her. Nobody knows where she gets them. But London Breed's blue.
London Breed. Yeah, who wore it worse?
Like Pepsi blue,
Hillary blue. I like to think of it.
Lori Lightfoot, she's a married lesbian. Easier to perhaps make an argument that you're siding with the cops. However, a cynical argument that may be. With London Breed, it's widely known London Breed's a straight lady who dated former Mayor Willie Brown, and her now deposed head of the SF our Department of Public Works, DPW,
Mr. Clean.
Yeah, Mohammed Nuru, the dude who starts a 7-year sentence in federal prison in January after being arrested during a corruption sting of various city officials by the FBI. We can talk about that in future episodes because the FBI
would be a fascinating future episode. And we could also talk about how did London Breed get off scot-free, not to promote prisons, but it's a fascinating...
It is interesting. Yeah, like so many...
We can bracket it, though. We can, just to keep our viewership and listenership, which comprises a lesser...
Yeah, and readership as well. So the FBI it's still an open investigation, and the latest word from just local media is that there is still the possibility that other SF politicians could go down for corruption, which is what these others have gone down for.
But to bring it to your point earlier too, right? It is funny that there are so many, because the maybe equally horrible, though smaller to Pride, lesbians who tech. Once CIA-funded venture, also hosted London Breed, and she's a guest of honor every year at that, even though she's very much not a lesbian.
She's an ally. Well, they changed the name of this conference, Lesbians Who Tech, to Lesbians Who Tech and Allies. So now, but that was only a couple of years ago. So like prior to that, it was a misnomer.
And this all has to do this inclusion thing, right? It all has to do with people's, we can speak in these terms as gays, I think fetish for power, right? And their proximity to power is one of the reasons that London Breed is so welcome at these events, is that, a lot of gay people with terrible politics see a powerful person, gonna use another term here, give them validation in some sort of way, right? And we could think of validation as either symbolic, like, oh, you're a human, or, material in the way that they get real estate deals and they get business contracts.
Certainly.
Not to step on our district conversation for later, but
as far back as my first like nascent thoughts of like, oh, maybe I'm a little different. I remember, rolling up to the magazine rack at Borders Books and like Out magazine. It was always like an ally on the cover.
Right.
And then the GLAAD Awards, which is like these, annual awards in LA.
Which I can assume we're up for.
Oh, this podcast? Yeah, for the new podcasting category? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We better be.
Our goal, the reason we started this was to get a GLAAD award, if we're being honest. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that award ceremony, as far back as I remember, it was about the allies. It was, because they wanted, I don't know, Charlize to show up. And she did. So I did the community benefit from that. She's cute.
And Charlize Theron, an African woman.
True. It's true. That too. Intersection.
I'm sure she checked more than one box that day.
After the mayor chose the cops and after the SF Pride board, the 5 trans people on salary at the trans district understood mayor could potentially maybe defund them and their 6-figure salaries might disappear. They chose to kind of throw the trans community they allegedly represent under one of those tricked out SFPD Winnebagos. They park on the street sometimes. The LGBTQ district and leather district followed their lead. So they decided to say, no, now we've reconsidered and we believe the police should be able to march in uniform. So SF Pride could then show that disinviting the cops from marching in uniform had been a misunderstanding. And Mayor London Breed,
common in the queer community.
Yeah, lots of misunderstandings over these sorts of things. In June 2022, basically to wrap it up, cops marched another day in the parade. And they were allowed to march with guns, even though that was another big flashpoint for Pride 2022, because San Francisco is a city that we have quite a few anti-gun laws, unless you're, of course, a cop or what have you.
Then you can be loud and proud.
And you can wear your gun on your shoulder or in your holster. They weren't allowed to.
Your gender will not be policed as a cop. No matter where you put that holster.
Are you a rifle? Are you an AK? Although AKs were not allowed because no automatic weapons were allowed at the Pride parade.
Within sight, right? Because we can often assume that, for example, you've said it's a fact that there are snipers and things that have, probably automatic or semi-automatic weapons.
Yeah.
So even when, which is also worth mentioning to our massive audience, that even when you don't physically see police in Pride, if you're unfortunate enough to
look up,
they are. They're always there.
There's windows that
we have
long
always
identified.
As the old police saying goes from the police community.
They said that they needed them because they had gotten so much, kind of hate from the community.
And things as part of the, or maybe
the cops.
The cops. I'm sorry. What was I thinking? I was thinking of Pulse victims.
No. Think of the real victims, which are the cops.
Yeah.
So they felt unsafe without having guns on them. And so that's why they needed them. And this was, again, the snipers were up there getting paid overtime. Well, in one case, the cops did use tear gas. There's some videos online that kind of ended that Sunday of Pride 2022, just because some kids were having fun, hanging out in public after Pride officially ended at 5 p.m. and they were trying to disperse people so that they could bring through the cleanup crew. Yeah.
Sanitation crew, right.
So that's how cops were gone. I guess all it took was Zoom. So thank you, Zoom.
Yeah. Thank you, Zoom,
for keeping cops away for a couple years. Well, also, we should give some credit to the largest anti-cop and maybe just
that
large
too. That
protests
did, yeah. No, to be fair, yeah, Zoom was like mostly responsible, but the the riots in 2020, they did their part.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I don't want to say that, things like the BLM posters in the SFPD stations were what came out of that moment, but it's what came out of it for the structures of power that are already in place that we're trying to make sure that that energy was stifled.
Yeah, I mean the BLM poster in the cop station tells us, right, and the parade itself is a model for how structures of power will include us and not exclude us, and that's actually the most violent thing they can do, right? And
well, I didn't mention this earlier. About 8% of cops in San Francisco are Black, but the Black population continues to hover around 3%.
Right, yeah.
And I mean, a lot of cops don't actually live in the city. They live outside of the city and they commute in. But it just kind of shows you, there's an overrepresentation of people that are being policed the most to fill the SFPD if it was all Black.
Right, it wouldn't solve and it's also a good way for our listeners, if you didn't know, anytime someone becomes a cop, in this humble reader, I would argue they are no longer, they should no longer be part of the community they represent. Black cops are not Black to me as a Black person, right? I mean, they're not. And as you know, if you're Black and ever been pulled over by a police, they will be worse to you than, especially if there's a white cop present. So yeah, it's very much like you're saying. That should show us that inclusion is for the structures of power. Because if having Black police officers somehow helped there be more Black people in San Francisco, then there would, then there wouldn't be 8% Black cops and 3% Black people, which is a really obvious mathematica for we have a huge STEM audience, so I know they'll appreciate that statistic.
Texas Instruments, shout out.
Huge women in STEM, Texas,
No, same. Miss Major in my upcoming book.
The title of which
it's called Miss Major Speaks. She speaks about her experience with cops and her, like, the community's experience with cops more generally. Cops who are Black second. They're blue first. Blue.
That's a common expression, right?
The uniform. Yeah. Thanks for listening to Sad Francisco. Now you know why the police were not allowed to march in uniform. God, that is such a low bar, but they couldn't even.
And but it's also, it should tell you why we need to abolish pride, right? Because the other part of this is they could have just said, if cops are going to march, we're not going to, and just canceled it. But they not had pride, and people could have just done their own thing, which they did do in 2020. And to throw that in there,
super cute.
More. That was cute. Yeah. And so someone allegedly tagged Manny's. That was great.
I think it was like Mission High School kids. They didn't, I don't know if I'm not going to say they tagged Manny's, but they organized that, like
the counter approach. Kind of alternate pride.
Like, anti-pride.
Yeah, there were a lot of,
march.
So it's also, I hope people leave this more so with not kind of we need to be better about our pride standards, right? Because I think, like you're suggesting, that is what pride has been invented for. It's been invented for this kind of inclusion. We actually need to just abolish the entire event and not sweep homeless people from the streets to have a big parade, and not, who are trans and queer, and not basically create a forum for police, which is more of what the parade is than it is, quote unquote, for queer people, right? As we know. Yeah.
It's for Kaiser. It's for Aetna.
For Google. It's for
you have choices out there. Yeah. Make the choice to not attend Pride, I guess.
Not attend Pride. And work to destroy it. I'm going to go a little step further. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
No more snipers on roofs is generally a good thing. That feels like a low bar too. Can we just say
it does really feel like a low bar, but we'll just have to wait for Pride 2023 to see what's in store.
We'll be doing the same episode.
Well, look
It
up.
won't be a rerun.
Look up to those rooftops in 2023.
Thanks for spending time in San Francisco. This episode was produced by Kristen Siafi, Toshio Meronek, and Caitlin Wood. We release a new episode every 2 weeks with early access and bonus episodes for subscribers of the show. To subscribe, go to patreon.com/sadfrancisco. That's SAD Francisco, where you can help us cover the editing and transcriptions for the show. We'll see you back here soon.